Hey, welcome to this tutorial about public key encryption from trapdoor permutations. So recall this construction that we have here, where we encrypted a single bit m by basically choosing a random x, then blinding m with the hardcore predicate of x, and then adding f of x as like a decryption hint for whoever should decrypt this. And all of this works because the secret key in this construction is actually the trapdoor of the trapdoor permutation. So if I get such a ciphertext like here, I can just take a look at this f of x, and I can use my trapdoor to compute x from it. And then if I have x, then I can obviously compute the hardcore predicate of x, and then recompute my message by XORing the second component with the hardcore bit. And in the lecture, we've proven that if I don't have the secret key, I don't get any information about m from this ciphertext. And what I want to do is to draw a parallel to what we did for symmetric encryption. So if you look back, then remember that at some point we were in the situation that we had a one-way permutation, and we wanted to create a pseudonym generator from that. Do you remember how this went? Yeah, we just put x, our random x that we get as input, through the one-way permutation, and then we appended the hardcore bit of x. And then we were able to prove that if HC is a hardcore predicate for f, then this whole construction is a PRG with the expansion factor m+1. And the idea there was just that this f of x is by definition just random. It's a random x thrown into a permutation, so that's fine. And if this hardcore bit here didn't look random, like if we had an adversary that would look at the string and see, oh, this second part here, that's the hardcore bit for the x that's hidden in this first part, then from that, we would be able to construct an adversary that can compute the hardcore bit. By computing hardcore bits, given just the image of the one-way permutation, should be difficult by definition of the hardcore bit. So overall, this became a secure PRG. And now let's fast forward to now. We have this ciphertext here. So that's pretty much the same as we had before. We have this f of x, and then we had the hardcore bit. And well, from what we've learned here in this PRG part, we know that this hardcore bit looks random. And because of this hardcore bit is a good candidate to blind m with. So now you can take a look at this encryption scheme and basically think, okay, this is this PRG construction. It's just that this hardcore bit we also XORed with m to make this PRG basically an encryption scheme. And because ciphertexts in this construction are basically just PRG values, we can easily imagine that this is a secure encryption scheme. And now the whole trick of this whole public key encryption stuff is just that instead of using this one fixed one-way permutation f, we now make it so that every user generates their own one-way permutation, essentially. So they choose random parameters I, and then that's their public key. That's basically telling everyone, use this fi in order to encrypt stuff for me. So use this particular one-way permutation. And because these one-way permutations that we're using here are actually trapdoor permutations, we also have that the user, while he's generating his own one-way permutation, he can also generate this trapdoor for it. So this means for someone looking at the ciphertext, nothing changes. So now it's just a like a custom-made one-way permutation that's used if I want to encrypt something for this guy. But other than that, nothing changes. For someone who doesn't have the trapdoor, this still is kind of a PRG. So it's pseudo-random and looks like random string. But the receiver of this ciphertext, they can use the trapdoor, and they can use it to kind of break this PRG property. Because with the trapdoor, you can check whether or not the last bit is actually the hardcore bit for the x that's hidden in the first part. And then you can use this to decide whether or not this is like m was 0 or m was 1. So this whole argument why this construction is secure encryption scheme, it kind of boils down to the fact that this looks like this PRG that we had in the beginning, and that proof is still valid. Like the trapdoor just doesn't play a role in this scenario, so it's the same. And now in this proof, the only difference that we have to the proof that we did for this PRG is that we immediately wrote it down as like an encryption scheme. So we immediately go from an attacker against the encryption scheme to an attacker against the hardcore predicate. But in spirit, this proof of this PRG and the proof of this encryption scheme, they kind of prove the same thing. So the encryption scheme that we just saw was for a single bit, and we had two ways in the lecture to fix this. The one way was to generically say, okay, if I have a CPA secure encryption scheme, then this is secure under multiple encryptions too. So as an encryption scheme to encrypt multiple bits, I can just encrypt every bit individually, and then this is fine. But if I do this, then my ciphertext become pretty long, because one ciphertext is n+1 bits long. So if I have multiple bits that I'm encrypting, then for every single bit, I pay n+1 bits ciphertext. So that's why we got this idea here with the way to encrypt longer messages more efficiently, where essentially we just pay these n bits once, and then for every bit that we're encrypting, we just append a single bit to the ciphertext. And that construction we didn't prove in the lecture. However, with what we just learned, this construction as well is pretty close to something that we've seen before. Can you maybe already guess what that is? Well, at some point, we've shown that if I have a PRG with the expansion factor n+1, I can make this a PRG with like arbitrary polynomial expansion factor. So how does this construction work? Well, we ran x through the original PRG, which then gave us a string of length n+1. And we took the first n bits to use afterwards again. And we took the last bit as the first output bit of this PRG. Because this last bit in particular is pseudorandom, so this is like a good output for the PRG. And then we took the x2, applied the PRG again, and we again get an x3 and another pseudorandom bit. So we can just add this pseudorandom bit to our list, etc. We did all of this, and then eventually we also appended the x that we got from the last PRG. And now if we take this concrete PRG that we've just talked about, then these x's here are just repeatedly run through the PRG. So repeatedly run through the f, meaning that this xl+1 is just f applied l times to x. And the sigma I, they by definition are these hardcore bits that the PRG uses. So now if we look at this, and we look at this encryption scheme here, we see that this exactly maps to be pretty much the same thing. So basically we took this PRG value and we used this part of the PRG value to just XOR with the message. So then kind of the same argument that we had before holds as well here. In the CPA encryption game, the trapdoors don't play any role. So essentially we can just look at this thing here as a pseudorandom string where part of it we've just XOR'd with the message. And then because this pseudorandom string looks pseudorandom also to the attacker against the encryption scheme, we can easily argue that this part which is XOR'd with the message also looks random. And so it's kind of easy to get this idea that this construction should be secure as well. So the lecture notes state that you can prove this with a hybrid argument. And that hybrid argument essentially we've already done when we proved that this PRG extension, so the n+1 expansion factor to poly expansion factor, that this is secure. Oh, I have one quiz for you. And that is, what if I use the following construction? So that's the same as before, just that I'm also XORing this M0 with the XL+1. And now if you think about it, we've just talked about how this is a PRG, and this XL+1 is also part of the PRG value. So it's part of this pseudonym string. So we could, in general, just use it to also encrypt messages, like this M0 that I've added here. So M0 now would be a string of length n. And now my question to you is, why didn't we do it this way? It seems like we can get n additional bits in this encryption for free. Okay, the answer is, well, security-wise, this actually works. So indeed, the same argument with the PRG still works. The problem is just that we can't decrypt anymore. So in the normal scheme, we would use this XL+1 to decrypt, to actually start inverting. So to reconstruct XL, XL-1, XL-2, etc. So that we can actually compute all of these hardcore predicates that we need in order to get our message. But this part is also blinded with like a message, and when we're decrypting, we don't know what message is in it. Then we can't get to the XI anymore. So security-wise, fine. It's just not an encryption scheme anymore. All right, so that's it for talking about some old stuff and some new stuff, and bringing these worlds kind of together, getting kind of a different look at these trapdoor permutations, because most of the ways that we use them now for encryption, we've already seen for POGs. Thanks for listening, and see you.